Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 345. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Sunday, January the 7th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. First podcast of 2024. Happy New Year, dear listeners. The topic of today's podcast, the essay, and I've talked about this guy before, and I've entitled this The Nightmare That Is Xi Jinping. He's the head of China. What is he? He's president, prime minister. He's the dictator of China. Okay, let's not mince words. He's president for life. The Constitution says he can't be. He said, yeah, well, I'm just going to change the Constitution. There were some people who objected. They were all either thrown in prison or killed, all of them. So there's no objection to Xi Jinping doing whatever he wants to do. I've spoken out against him many times, and mainly because, again, this has been an ongoing topic on my podcast. Friends, we have no idea, most of us have no idea how lucky we are to live in the U.S., to live in the West, per se, whether it's the U.S., Canada, England, France, Germany, Japan, Korea, Australia, go on and on and on. Anywhere in the West, anywhere in the first world, okay? Even in some respects, the second world, but certainly the first world. We have no idea how fortunate we are. Sure, we complain about our politicians, and here in the U.S., we've had just horrible presidents. We've got Joe Biden right now who doesn't know what day it is. He's so out of it. And before that, we had Donald Trump, who was if you didn't agree with everything he said, he made fun of you and called you names. I mean, no class at all. Those are the presidents that we've had. But when you compare it to the presidents elsewhere, how would you like to have Xi Jinping running your country? Okay. And first of all, even if you didn't like him, not only could you not vote him out, but you couldn't say anything bad about him. It's like the old, there was an old joke back in the Reagan era about how the Russian diplomat, the Soviet diplomat at that time, and the U.S. diplomat were talking amongst each other, and the U.S. diplomat said, well, we have a whole lot more freedom here in the U.S. than you do in the Soviet Union. And the diplomat from the Soviet Union says, oh, no, I disagree. We have just as much freedom as you do in the U.S. So the U.S. diplomat said to the Soviet diplomat, he said, look, for example, I can say that Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States, is a horrible person and a jerk and needs to be thrown out of office. And you can't say that. And the Soviet diplomat said, well, I most certainly can. And the U.S. diplomat said, no, they'll throw you in prison. And the Soviet diplomat said, they absolutely will not. I can say that too. He said, okay, then say it. And the Soviet diplomat said, Ronald Reagan is a horrible president. He should be thrown out of office and voted out. He's terrible. You get my picture, okay? We have the freedom to criticize our government officials, and we certainly do. And usually the criticism is deserving, okay? What's going on in China right now, though, is just, it's beyond approach. They get worse and worse and worse. Let's go back. Remember, years ago, China had the one-child policy, okay? And where you couldn't have any more than one child. Well, I'd like to have two or three. Nope, you can't. You can only have one. And if you had more than one, you were penalized big time because they had a huge population problem, okay? And for 35 years, they had the one-child policy. Well, there were two problems with that. And everybody in the West smiled to themselves thinking these people haven't a clue as to what they're doing by having this one-child policy. Two things were going on. First of all, most people were abiding by the government and they would have one child. That's it, okay? But every family wanted a boy. So the girls were aborted. And every family had a son. And the sons grew up. with nobody to marry because nobody had daughters. Okay? That was problem number one. Problem number two is that now all of a sudden, China has a very old population. And the one thing China does better than we do here is retirement is 60. At 60 years old, you retire, you're done. Okay? And their population is way over 60. I mean, put it this way, their population is older than ours and getting older. They have more people over 60 than ever before, okay? And they're thinking to themselves, okay, a few years back, they said, okay, that's it. No more one-child policy. We're gonna go ahead and get rid of that. You can have as many children as you want, as many as you like. Go ahead. But then they didn't. And the government said, wait a minute, didn't you hear us? You can have children, as many as you like. And the women said, yeah, we heard you, but we don't want to have any children. Now the government is saying, yeah, we really do want you to have children. And they're doing things to almost force these women to get married and have children because the Chinese population is dropping. And there was an interesting story in the Wall Street Journal. In fact, the Chinese women, according to the story, they've had it. The response to Beijing's demand for more children, they've just flat out said no. In fact, they're fed up with government harassment and they're wary of the sacrifices of child rearing. And many young women are putting themselves ahead of what Beijing and their families want. These women's refusal to have set off a crisis for the Communist Party, which desperately needs more babies to rejuvenate China's aging population. Now, with the number of babies in free fall, fewer than 10 million were born in 2022, compared with 16 million in 2012. Now, China is heading towards a demographic collapse. In fact, China's population is still around 1.4 billion, and it's likely to drop to just 500 million by the year 2100. So basically, by 2/3. If things continue as they are. And the government is blaming women. Well, women do have children. They're the only ones that have children, contrary to what some people seem to think. But in October, Chinese leader Xi Jinping urged the state-backed All China Women's Federation to, quote, prevent and resolve risks in the women's field. That's according to an official account of the release. Now, I'll continue. Quote, it's clear that he was not talking about risks faced by women, but considering women as a major threat to social stability. Now, who said that? Clyde Wang, an assistant professor for politics at Washington and Lee University, who studies Chinese government propaganda. Now, that's an American school, not a Chinese school. That's why he was able to say what he said. Now, the State Council, that's China's top government body, didn't respond to questions about Beijing's population policies. Now, the Chinese Communist Party lectures on family values, and those lectures are having little effect, even in rural parts of China. In fact, there's a mall in the town of Quanjinyao, and there's a lady named He Yangjing, who's a mother of two. And she says she's gotten several calls from community officials to encourage her to have a third child. She has no such plans. She doesn't want to. In fact, her preschool son, the preschool that her son attends, I should say, cut the number of classrooms in half because there's just not enough kids to fill the classrooms. And she has a friend. The friend's name is Fang Chen, the mother of a 3-year-old girl. And relatives are pressuring her to have more children, hoping she has a baby boy. Ms. Chen says, having had one child, I think I've done my duty. A second child, she said, would be too expensive. She said she tells relatives, I can have another kid as long as you give me 300,000 yuan. That's about $41,000. Of course, the family isn't pitching in, so she's not having a kid. Now, many young people in China, disheartened by a weak economy and strong unemployment, seek alternatives to their parents' lives. Many women, in fact, view the prescribed formula of marriage and children as a raw deal for women. Now, Molly Chen, who's a 28-year-old, she said the demands of caring for her aging relatives and her job as an exhibition designer in Shenzhen leave no room for kids or a husband. All she wants to do in her free moments is read and scroll through pet videos on her phone. She doesn't want to have a family. She'd rather read and scroll through pet videos, okay? To be fair, she's taking care of her parents too, and she has a demanding job. Now, Ms. Chen followed the story of Su Min, who's a retiree who video blogged about her solo road trip around China to escape a bad marriage. Chen said that the story, as well as online videos that women post about their lives, have deepened her impression that many men chose wives mostly as caretakers for their children, caretakers for the husbands themselves, and for both sets of aging parents, like a built-in babysitter, not a partner. Ms. Chen then lamented that she doesn't have time even for a pet. I can't afford to take care of anything else outside my parents and work. Now, when Beijing said it would abolish the 35-year-old one-child policy, that was back in 2015, officials expected a baby boom. Instead, they got a baby bust. New maternity wards were built only to close a few years later. Sales of baby care products like formula, diapers have dropped dramatically. In fact, businesses that focused on babies now focus on senior citizens because that's what they've got more of. New preschools built to make child rearing more affordable struggle to fill classrooms, and many of them have closed. In fact, in 2022, the number of preschools in China fell 2%, the first decline in 15 years. Demographers and researchers predict the data will show Chinese births dipping to below 9 million in 2023. Now, the UN forecasts 23 million births in India, which, by the way, this year, 2020, or last year, I should say, 2023, it passed China as the world's most populous country. That's right. The world's most populous country is no longer China. It's India. They had 23 million births, okay? China had, 9 million, okay? The U.S. will have about 3.7 million people born, or had about 3.7 million children born in 2023. Plus, of course, the U.S. has immigration where nobody's going to China to live that is not Chinese. The one-child policy brought much of China's demographic gloom. In fact, there are fewer young people than in the past to have children. And there's even fewer children of childbearing years because the one-child policy discouraged having girls. They wanted boys. So there's less kids and there's less girls, and only girls, women, can have babies. Now, those women are increasingly reluctant to marry and have children, and so that still accelerates the population decline. In fact, in China, check this out, a country of 1.4 billion people, only 6.7 million registered to be married in 2022. Now, that's compared to 13 million in 2013. So half of the people, or the number of marriages registered, have fallen in half, okay? The country's total fertility rate in 2022, that's the average number of babies born to a woman, it's approaching one birth per woman, 1.09. In 2020, it was 1.30. To keep a population stable, you need 2.1. So it's dropping precipitously. In fact, a campaign for the birth-friendly culture in China has taken the tone of an urgent national mission with government-organized matchmaking events and a program encouraging military families to have more babies. Okay, you're in the military. You got to do as we say. That soldiers win battles, they say. When it comes to giving birth to a second or third child and implementing the national fertility policy, we are also taking the lead and charging the front. That's according to Zhen Jian. He's a top OBGYN at a military hospital in Tianjin. He announced that to the state media last year. Now, in August, residents in the western city of Xi'an said that they received an automated greeting from the government during the Qiji festival. And that's the Chinese equivalent to Valentine's Day, okay? Qiji in China is like Valentine's Day over here. Here's what the message said. Automated message that calls people on their phone. Wishing you sweet love and marriage at an appropriate age. Let's extend the Chinese bloodline. How romantic. And by the way, can you think of anything less romantic than the Chinese Communist government? Even if you're a Chinese, all right? Now, the message drew a backlash on social media. Now, let's talk about social media in China. First of all, when you're in China, you can't get on Facebook. When I was in China, I tried. Can't do it. It doesn't let you on. They've got their own Facebook type thing. I forget what it's called, but it's monitored by the government. And they're still slamming the government on their own social media. So if 1.4 billion people all slam the government, I guess you can't throw them all in jail, right? In fact, one message drew a backlash. It said, quote, "My mother-in-law doesn't even push me to have a second child," said one person. "I guess next, arranged marriages will come back," another one commented. Now, why would they say that? Well, Beijing leans to more encouragement than just the kind of coercion to having a one-child policy. In fact, local governments offer cash incentives for couples having a second and third child. A county in Jiang province gives $135 for every couple getting married before they're 25. Now, in 2021, the city of Lianzhou asked unmarried people to sign up for government-sponsored dating initiatives to use big data to find matches citywide. A district in the city of Handan provided a one-stop wedding planning service. How romantic. Now, the shift means that some women have gone from trying to dodge punishment from having too many children to being hounded to have more. What do I mean? Check this out. A decade ago, so some 10 years ago, there was a woman, and her surname was Zhang. She didn't want to use her first name because she didn't want to be in trouble with the government. But Ms. Zhang, she said she was in a cat and mouse game with authorities after she decided to have a second child. That was before the one-child policy was abolished. Okay, now when she was pregnant with the second child, she left her job to stay out of public view. Fearful officials would pressure her to have an abortion, she said. Now, after giving birth in 2014, she stayed with relatives for a year. When she returned home, local family planning officials fined her and her husband $10,000 for having that second kid. She said she was forced to have an IUD implanted to prevent pregnancy. Authorities required her to have it checked every 3 months. So she had the second child, okay? They fined her $10,000, made her insert an IUD so she wouldn't get pregnant, and made her have it checked by a doctor once every 3 months to make sure it was still there. The government went through all that to make sure she didn't have a third kid. Now, some months later, they abolished the two-child or one-child policy, and the Chinese government announced that they just scrapped it. And for a while, authorities still demanded that Ms. Zhang have her IUD checked. But then they had a change of heart. Now check this out. This is where it gets totally bizarre. It's strange in this country, as strange as we have in the things as we have in this country. In fact, well, Big Brother's watching and the government knows this and this and that. There's nothing that approaches what the Chinese government is doing to these women. Now, Ms. Zhang now gets text messages from officials encouraging her to have more children. She deletes them in anger. Quote, "I wish they would stop tossing us around and leave us ordinary people alone." So she had the second kid. Her and her husband were fined $10,000. They made her insert an IUD to make sure she wouldn't have any kids. Now she's getting phone calls encouraging her to have more kids. That is bizarre because they have a big problem. Now, everybody with a teaspoonful of brains, anybody who could do basic math knew this was going to happen, especially when that one-child policy was only boys were being born. The girls were being aborted, okay? And everyone knew down the road. I mean, for years, when I was a young man, I was saying, this is going to be a disaster for these people. And it has been. And as the man says, the chickens are coming home to roost. Now, there's been a tightening of licenses for clinics offering medical procedures to block pregnancies. In other words, they're discouraging even birth control in China now. Now, in 1991, that was the height of the one-child policy, 6 million tubal ligations and 2 million vasectomies were performed. Now, in 2021, there were less than 200,000 tubal ligations and only 6,700 vasectomies. That's, 10%. Now, on social media, people complain about getting a vasectomy appointment is as difficult as winning the lottery. So why do I mention this? Well, basically, you remember in China, they actually have pretty good health care, but it's 100% government health care. So if you go to the government and say, okay, I'd like to have a vasectomy, they say, nope, sorry. In a country of 1.4 million people, the majority of them being men, 2,600 vasectomies were granted. That's it. Okay. And this is just me inserting what I think. I would suspect those 2,700 or 2,600 were probably cases where they didn't want these men to have children. Maybe they were criminals. Maybe they had mental problems. Maybe they were developmentally disabled. Okay. Because out of a country of 1.4 million, 2,600 is a rounding error, okay? Now, officials have tried to also dial back abortions. Now, you think a pro-life guy like me, well, that's pretty good. Well, yeah, but they're not dialing it back because all of a sudden they found religion. They're dialing it back because abortion was a key tool for officials during the one-child policy to get rid of women having kids. In fact, abortions have fallen to more than a third, from more than 14 million abortions in 1991 to under 9 million in 2020. China has since stopped releasing data on vasectomies and tubal ligations and abortions. That's why we have no data past 2020. They're not even letting people know the numbers. Now, again, my opinion, the translation, there's next to none. Because there's no reason that the government would stop releasing that information unless it made them look bad. Now, the populace is continuing to be pressured, of course. Now, Wang Feng, Wang is a sociology professor at the University of California, Irvine, said that there have been two conflicting shifts in Chinese society. Number one, a rising awareness of women's rights, and number two, increasingly patriarchal policies. Now, what do we mean by that? Again, let's go back to comparing China to the U.S. Are women on equal footing in the U.S.? I'm going to say yes, but there's some data that says no. I can tell you why. In my opinion, I think that data is skewed. But either way, nobody would agree. Nobody would say that rights for women have gotten worse in the last 10 years than they were 10 years ago. So you can say that we're there. You can at least say that we're closer, okay, to having men and women on the same plane, okay? Now, for the first time in a quarter century, no women are among the top 24 officials on the Politburo. 0. Now, ever since Xi took power in 2012, China has fallen to 38th place in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report. They're now they haven't fallen to 38. They've fallen 38 places. They're now number 107 out of 146 nations. There are very few nations who have less women represented in government equality than Communist China. Now, in the Mao era, the party promised to end the Confucian traditions that discriminated against women. What has Xi done? Xi instead has stressed Confucian values, including the women's duty to have children, duty to the state, not out of love of family, duty to the state. Families also pressure women into traditional roles: cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, husbands, and in-laws. Now, Sophie Wu Yang, she's 40, has known since middle school that she didn't want to get married. And she didn't want to have children. She just didn't. She saw how things were, and she said, I don't want any part of this. Now, she studied computer science and was one of the few women in her village to pursue advanced schooling. She now works as a software engineer in Canada. Now, Ouyang said that throughout her 20s, her family leaned on her to marry. Her mother said that if she had known that Ouyang wouldn't have had children, she'd have stopped her from getting a higher education. What? That's bizarre. Now, Ouyang cut off contact with her family more than a decade ago. She's blocked her parents, aunts, uncles on social media apps. Quote, if I'm a bit more gentle with them, she said, they will take advantage of me. So she had to cut her family off. Her family even is pressuring her to do what she doesn't want to do. Now, the Chinese government, which sees feminism as a nefarious ideology backed by foreign forces, has detained women's rights activists and erased those social media accounts in a years-long crackdown. So you think the strongman is a misogynist? Check out the communist Chinese, okay? I'm what's her face? Gloria Steinem compared to these people, all right? Now, even so, women have become more vocal online about their experiences relating to relationships, families, and work. Their posts show a personal form of feminism that's harder for authorities to police. Kind of like a backhanded protest, all right? Now, there's a lady named Simona Dai. She's 31. She started a podcast called Oh Mama. It's about birth and marriage. And that's after she learned that her mother had an abortion when she was 8.5 months pregnant with a girl back in 1990. Again, you could have one child. When you found out it was a girl, generally you aborted that child because every family wanted a son. Now, Di got married when she was 26, and she said she had to endure her husband's chauvinistic views, especially during the pandemic when they argued about household chores. She became adamant about not having children, despite pressure from the couple's families. Since she has applied to end her marriage, quote, if I didn't divorce, I might have had to have a baby. And she didn't want to have a kid, all right? A national debate over the treatment of women erupted in 2022 in China when the video, and I remember this, when the video of a woman, she was a mother of 8, okay, kept in a shed with a chain around her neck. It sparked social media storm in China. In fact, the women's plight resonated with Chinese women who saw a connection to their own roles. Now, these women knew that because they had more children or weren't doing what the government wanted, they weren't kept in a hut, chained to a hut, okay? But still, they saw that's how the government treats people who don't do as they say. And they had some type of solidarity with this woman. And even on social media, talking out against the government on these things in social media. They're doing it so carefully, and there's so many of them doing it, that the government really can't do much about it. Again, you can't throw 1.4 billion people in prison. Now, there's also a woman who worked at a branch at the All China Women's Federation in Guangzhou. She worked there from 2020 to 2021. This lady, who wants to be anonymous, said, the branch focused on preventing gender-related topics from going viral. She said the organization paid more to a tech company to police social media comments than it did to budget for women's advocacy. In other words, they're a communist government, okay? So they have, let's make sure everybody's treated the same, because that's how communism is, right? Okay, they paid more to have social media scanned and monitored to make sure they were saying what the government wanted than they gave to women's rights. And again, women are sick of this. They see it. They're not stupid, okay? During training, this anonymous woman said, employers were warned of serious repercussions if women's issues in Guangzhou drew unwanted social media action. The Women's Federation didn't respond to requests for comments. They say you can't do it. Well, can you comment further? No, we said it. That's all we're going to say, okay? China's cyberspace watchdog, which polices materials seen to be harmful to Chinese internet users, said in December that it was targeting content spreading wrong views on marriage. So you can't even say bad things about marriage. Nope, I don't want to get married. I don't like marriage. That's bad. Now, some women who decided years ago against marriage and children consider themselves lucky. In fact, going back to Ms. Oyang, the software engineer in Canada, she said, you know what? I got out. I've divorced my family. I feel like I completely dodged the bullet. So there you have it. That's how things are in communist China. How would you like to live there? I've spoken out against Xi Jinping many, many times, so much so. I told my employer, because I've been to China several times on business. If you combine China with Hong Kong, probably about 7 or 8. And I've told him I can't do this anymore. They said, well, why not? They said, well, because of what I've said. I'm afraid I'll go over there. Now, I don't know how popular the James Strong show is in China. Probably not very popular at all. But because of what I've said, I'd hate to have my passport taken and have myself thrown in jail, and then I'd be SOL. So that's just the way those people roll over there, okay? Even once upon a time when I started going to Hong Kong, it was, one country, 2 sets of rules. Different currency, different rules. People in Hong Kong elected their own governors and officials. Not anymore. In fact, big protests against Falun Gong, who was an organization that speaks out against the communists, okay? And the communist government was persecuting them in mainland China. And there were big protests in Hong Kong showing pictures of this. Not anymore. That doesn't happen anymore, okay? And people have left Hong Kong in droves because it's no longer the one country, two sets of rules. It's one country, one set of rules. And they've really cracked down big time. In some respects, you can force people to do what they want, to do what they don't want, okay? You can keep them in certain jobs. You can only pay them so much. You can tell them where to live. You can do many, many things to keep your thumb on people. But when it comes to having children, if you don't have many women in your country because of a draconian one-child rule that you had that didn't allow many women to be born, and the few women that are of childbearing ages don't want the misogynistic government with their thumb in their eye, they've just said, you know what, we're not getting married, we're not having kids, we're out. You can only do so much to force people to do what they don't want to do. So, dear listeners, I'll leave you with this. I just ask you to consider this podcast. Consider what I've said. Consider how things are elsewhere. Now, is that to say that we're all fantastic here in the U.S. and if we were fantastic here in the West? No, I'm not even insinuating that. We could be so much better. There's so much room for improvement. We could have things so much easier, so much cleaner, so much fill in the blank, okay? But here's the difference between the West and the communist countries. We have a chance to get there. It's not guaranteed, okay? But we have a chance to improve. If the people decide to make things the right way, elect the right people, if those right people they elect decide to do things correctly, we can improve. That's not going to happen over there. Xi Jinping is he's in his middle 60s, and most Chinese politicians tend to live well into their 80s. Xi Jinping is not going to give up power. So he's going to be in charge of that country for another 20 years, okay? In 20 years, it will be, quick do the math, 2044, okay? We'll be almost halfway to 2100, the year 2100. And again, if things go as they are right now, China will go from 1.4 billion to 500 million people, the vast majority of them being 50 and older. How do you think that's going to fare for their economy? How do you think that's going to fare for their military? How do you think that's going to fare for people getting stuff done? Dear listeners, that's what happens when you force people to do what they don't want to do. We have lots of freedom here in the West, a lot of freedom, more than we realize sometimes. So thank God for the freedom that we have. Thank God that we're not over there. In fact, I'll close with an ancient Chinese saying, okay? It's one that I heard years ago and I love it. And it's true. I was sad for I had no shoes until I met the man who had no feet. Translation: I'm not a fan of Biden. I'm not a fan of Trump. But my word, at least neither of them are Xi Jinping. Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your comments. Send me your emails. You folks do it every week, and I appreciate it. I'd love to hear your emails. I'd love to hear your comments. I do respond to each and every one of them, so thank you very much. Send me your email address, and I will send you a link to the podcast. You can download it and listen to it at your leisure. Please share with friends. I appreciate it. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.